the loneliness of not fitting in, a Zen path to self-belonging. Right now, your chest might feel like a locked wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards, holding your breath perfectly still because you are manually calculating every word, every gesture, and every silence to ensure you do not expose the gap between who you are and who they expect you to be. You are likely the one who sits in the family gathering or the social circle feeling like an uninvited ghost, an imposter who has memorized the script but cannot shake the cold, isolating certainty that you do not truly fit the container. Maybe you have spent the entire day filtering your thoughts, smoothing down your rough edges, and wearing a mask that has grown so heavy it makes your jaw ache in the dark. It is an exhausting kind of loneliness to buy your belonging at the cost of your own authenticity, lying awake while your mind replays social interactions, terrified that a single unscripted phrase will finally cause the community to cast you out. The space around you is shifting into the pale slate-gray quiet of a mountain twilight. Let your awareness register the thin, crisp air filtering through the window frame, carrying the sharp, faint scent of crushed pine needles, or the clean, bitter tang of high-altitude frost from a distant peak. The surface beneath you feels massive, flat, and uncompromising, offering a steady mineral shelf that does not demand that you bend your spine, alter your weight, or change your shape to accommodate its contours. Outside, the dry, distant scrape of wind over stone or the low rustle of dry leaves reminds you that the earth is fully prepared to ground your presence without asking you to match the vegetation of the valley below. You are permitted to occupy your exact perimeter tonight without performing for the room. What you are carrying in this quiet room is not a sign of failure, and the deep, aching mismatch you feel between yourself and your lineage does not mean you are broken. You have simply been forcing a wild, unconditioned spirit to live inside a mold that was never designed for your architecture. Tonight, we will not force the mind to be silent, nor will we try to demand that you magically bridge the distance between your truth and their expectations. We are here to sit with the reality of your unique density, discovering a form of belonging that exists precisely when you stop trying to blend with the smooth stone around you. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, dear friend. You are safe enough to soften into this independent space, because nothing is required of your identity for the next few hours. A surprising insight from Buddhist wisdom points toward a strange paradox. True belonging does not begin when you finally succeed in matching the scenery of the valley. It begins when you realize that the mountain sky never asks a high-altitude pine to behave like a lowland lily. The suffering we carry is not the fact that we are different from our families or our peers. It is the immense, draining resistance we bring to that difference, treating our unique grain as a flaw that must be hidden. We believe that by hypervigilantly monitoring our words, we are protecting our place in the circle. But overthinking your social presentation or replaying your conversations is not a form of safety. It is fear pretending to protect you, turning your unconditioned nature into something you must constantly apologize for. Take a slow breath, letting the cold air drop straight down into the lower pelvis and the base of your spine where that invisible alienation always seems to tighten first. You do not have to fix your relationships tonight, nor do you have to figure out how to navigate the next family dynamic or social gathering. Right now, your only task is to recognize that you have arrived at a very different shelf of rock, a place where your distinct weight is completely valid without external verification. Let the muscles in your face relax, allowing the expression you have maintained all day to flatten out completely in the darkness. You have spent so long being the chameleon, the performer, and the quiet survivor, that you may have forgotten the simple luxury of being an unworked stone resting on a solid surface. Maybe you have felt this too, that sharp spike of panic when you think about dropping the mask, as if showing your true texture will automatically leave you stranded in an empty desert. We have conditioned ourselves to believe that self-suppression is the only currency that can buy us a home among our peers. But if it feels right, notice that fear without immediately accepting its verdict that you are an outcast. The thought that claims you must twist your nature to be worthy of love is just a passing vibration in your awareness, like a gust of wind whistling through the branches of a solitary tree above the timberline. It cannot uproot you unless you give it your momentum. You can see the worry, name it as a performance, and still choose to let your skeleton sink more heavily into the frame of the bed. In a short while, we will travel to a high, wind-bitten shale terrace to look at how this very isolation can become a source of indestructible self-belonging rather than a punishment. But before we open that story, allow your physical frame to become acquainted with the concept of an unconditioned presence. Imagine a single wild pine seed carried by a mountain gale that falls into a dark, narrow rock crevice high on a sheer granite peak. It cannot blend with the smooth, vertical stone face, nor can it grow straight and tall like the trees in the soft, crowded forests below. It survives the winter precisely by twisting its roots directly into the hard mineral fissures, growing thick, compact, distinct, and completely secure within its own unique density. You have been treating your distinct texture as a mistake, throwing your energy into an endless imitation that leaves your spirit bruised and exhausted. You have weaponized the expectations of your lineage against the reality of your current self, creating an internal division that is far more painful than the loneliness of the mountain. It is time to let your roots find the mineral fissures, to allow yourself to experience the profound dignity of your own natural grain. There is a quiet, monumental bravery in allowing your presence to be exactly this distinct, this separate, and this unaligned with the valley, without adding the extra weight of your self-criticism. You are not abandoning the circle, you are simply pausing the exhausting work of pretending to be a shape you are not. As you lie here, listen to the cadence of this voice as if it were the steady, low scrape of stone on stone in a quiet mountain pass. There are no expectations placed upon your adaptability or your healing in this hour. You do not need to figure out how to blend in tomorrow or how to explain your truth to those who may not understand it. Let these words pass through your tired mind like a cool evening breeze through the branches of a solitary pine, leaving the trunk completely undisturbed. Every obligation to conform can wait on the lower slopes. The people whose approval you chase are safe within their own perspectives, and your anxious thoughts cannot force them to see your value tonight. Give yourself permission to be completely unaligned with their design for the remainder of this night, as we begin to step down the long pathway toward the high terrace. On a high, wind-bitten shale terrace far above the timberline, where the air was rare and tasted of winter ice, a young man named Ren lived among the silent peaks. Ren had been born into a famous lineage of imperial calligraphers in the lowlands, a family where generations had used fine hog bristle brushes to trace perfect, fluid black characters on smooth mulberry silk. His father and brothers moved through the courts with effortless grace, their lives defined by symmetry, fluid elegance, and the admiration of the capital. But Ren had been born with a different rhythm in his bones. His fingers were thick, his joints were stubborn, and his hands felt clumsy when holding a delicate brush. They only found their true comfort when grasping the heavy, unworked edge of cold alpine stone. The friction inside Ren was a constant, dull ache that lived beneath his ribs. He had spent his youth trying to force his thick fingers into the delicate postures of his brothers, manually smoothing down his rough manners and hiding his preference for the mountains. He felt like an imposter who had stolen the robes of a scholar, terrified that his clumsy nature would eventually shame his entire house. To escape the suffocating pressure of trying to blend with a family that spoke a language his soul could not translate, he had fled to the high-altitude scree fields, volunteering for the grueling work of repairing the stone paths that connected the isolated mountain hermitages. The terrace was a stark, slate-gray world where vegetation rarely took root. The only other person on the heights was an elderly, silent nun named Sister Rin, who spent her days clearing the high paths after the spring rockfalls. She was small, weathered by the bitter mountain frost, and her skin had the dry, rough texture of the shale itself. She rarely spoke, moving through the scree with a steady, unhurried density, her bare feet perfectly accustomed to the sharp edges of the loose gravel. Her primary task appeared entirely plain. She was building a low, dry stone retaining wall along the edge of the chasm to prevent the winter path from sliding into the valley below. Ren worked beside her for 3 moons, his heart heavy with the conviction that his presence on the mountain was merely another proof of his failure. He watched the smooth, uniform stones that formed the base of the wall, and he desperately tried to find rocks that matched their shape, wanting to prove that he could at least build something that looked orderly and correct. But his hands kept selecting stones that were uneven, sharp, and mismatched. One evening, as the pale mountain twilight turned the peaks into silhouettes of cold iron, Ren threw down his iron bar in frustration. The sound of the metal clanging against the shale was loud in the immense silence. He sat on a cold slab of stone, his head in his hands, staring at the uneven pile of rocks he had gathered. "I cannot even do this work correctly," he muttered, his voice tightening with an old deep-seated shame. "I cannot match the calligraphy of my father, and I cannot find a stone that matches the order of your wall. I am a mismatched piece. I do not fit anywhere, not in the capital and not on this terrace. I am entirely out of place." Sister Rin did not answer with words. She walked slowly over to his disordered pile, her sandals scraping softly against the loose gravel. She reached down and lifted a single, unpolished piece of dark shale. It was an awkward, uneven wedge, thick on one side and sharply pointed on the other, entirely different from the flat, rectangular stones she had been using for the face of the wall. It was a stone that any lowland mason would have cast aside as a useless fragment. She carried the dark wedge over to the section of the wall she was constructing. Near the corner, two large, smooth boulders had met, leaving a deep, irregular gap between them, a hollow space that made the entire section unstable. If she tried to force a smooth, square stone into that gap, it would slide out the moment the winter frost expanded the ground. Sister Rin looked at Ren, her gray eyes holding the vast, unblinking quiet of the mountain sky. She did not offer a comforting sermon, nor did she minimize his sense of isolation. Instead, she took the uneven shale wedge and slid it deep into the dark crevice between the two boulders. The sharp, irregular point of the shale found a hidden fissure within the granite. Sister Rin took her wooden mallet and struck the thick base of the wedge once, a solid, dull thud that echoed off the rock face. The mismatched stone did not blend with the smooth face of the wall. It stood out, dark, rough, and distinctly itself. Yet, the moment it was driven home, the shifting boulders on either side became completely locked in place. The wall became solid because the stone refused to be smooth. Sister Rin patted the rough base of the shale, then turned to Rin and spoke, her voice dry and resonant, like the wind moving through dry winter grass. "This wall does not require an army of identical bricks. Ren, if every stone were smooth and square, the first winter gale would tear the path from the cliff. The wall survives the ice precisely because this wedge maintains its sharp, uncompromised edges. It holds the mountain together not by matching its neighbors, but by anchoring its unique density into the hidden crack. Your family has their brush, but the mountain has this crevice. Why do you spend your life apologizing for the only shape that can hold this pass?" Ren looked from the old nun to the dark shale wedge driven deep into the heart of the granite wall. The stone stood exactly where it had fallen, uncompromising and rough, fully integrated into the structure without losing a fraction of its natural grain. It did not try to soften its corners. It did not look down at the valleys with regret. It simply occupied its perimeter with a monumental, silent validity. A heavy, grounding quiet descended into Ren's chest, as if the frantic inner dialogue that had tormented his youth had suddenly been crushed beneath a massive weight. He looked at his own thick, calloused hands, stained with the gray dust of the shale. For his entire life, he had viewed his distinct texture as a deformity, an unforgivable error that separated him from the love and acceptance of his lineage. But looking at the locked boulders, he saw a different truth. His nature was not a mistake. It was an unconditioned shape designed for a different landscape. He had been trying to be a fluid stroke of ink on silk, when he was meant to be the solid wedge that keeps the mountain path from falling. The realization settled into his bones with the absolute certainty of bedrock. The true agony he had been carrying was not the distance between himself and his family, but the constant, exhausting work of trying to shave down his own edges to fit a wall that didn't need him. He had been treating his authentic self like a secret crime, hiding his density behind a mask of compliance. In a short while, this high terrace will reveal how to fully rest within that density. But for now, Ren simply sat on the cold shale, listening to the dry whistle of the wind, realizing that his mismatch was the very anchor he had been searching for. This high mountain terrace is not telling us to stop feeling, nor is it asking us to become cold, distant, and unyielding like frozen mineral. It is not suggesting that you should look at your isolation or your family's lack of understanding with a forced, artificial smile, or that you should pretend that feeling out of place doesn't ache deep within your marrow. It is showing us something much quieter, a subtle shift in the inner landscape that occurs entirely within the way you hold your own existence. The real suffering Ren carried was not the simple fact that his fingers were thick, or that his preferences differed from the traditions of his family. The true agony lived in the way his mind held those facts, treating his natural architecture as an offense against the circle, an unforgivable defect that he had to spend his entire life force trying to alter. When we look into our own late-night reflections, we can see that we often maintain this exact same exhausting struggle against our own natural texture. In our modern emotional language, attachment is that rigid, desperate craving that says, I must force my personality, my values, and my truth into a shape that my family or my peers will instantly approve of, even if it means crushing my own spirit to fit. We believe that by hypervigilantly monitoring our presentation, we are buying our safety within the community. But hiding your authentic self or constantly replaying your social interactions is not a form of love. It is fear wearing the mask of manners, turning your distinct, unconditioned nature into a secret flaw that you must constantly apologize for. This is how we add a second wound to the first. The first wound is what life presents to us naturally, the reality that we are born with a unique grain, a different perspective, or a mismatched sensitivity that does not align with the expectations of our lineage. This first wound is like the rough stone on the terrace. It is distinct, it is sharp, and it is a reflection of the natural variation that belongs to all living things. The second wound is the one we give ourselves when we sit in the dark and burn with self-hatred for being different. It is the mental loop that claims we are fundamentally broken because we cannot trace the smooth calligraphy of our peers, the constant comparison that turned our distinct density into a reason to feel exiled. True mindfulness, when translated into the language of emotional reassurance, is simply the capacity to notice that internal friction without instantly joining the battle. It is the ability to lie here in the quiet and see the thought that says, I am a mistake because I do not fit in, without accepting that thought as an absolute truth. When you observe the anxiety or the loneliness, without immediately reinforcing it with more thinking, a tiny pocket of space opens up within your chest. You begin to realize that you are the vast, silent mountain peak that contains the weather. You are not the storm itself. Your mismatch is real, but the emotional prison is entirely optional. You can let the fear of rejection rise like frost on the shale, watching it glint in the dark without letting it split your foundation. Impermanence is often misunderstood as a cold reminder that everything we build will eventually fall to pieces. But for a person who feels like an imposter, it is a deeply liberating truth. It means that the intense emotional exhaustion you feel right now, the sharpest edge of the alienation, the panic of being discovered, and the heavy fog of self-repression is not a permanent fixture of your consciousness. Your identity is not a static mold that must be frozen forever to satisfy a family tradition. It is a living, changing presence that belongs to your own path. When we deeply absorb this, we stop demanding that our spirit remain an imitation of someone else's art, and we allow it to be what it is tonight, a heavy, unworked stone that has survived the journey to the high slopes. Compassion is the immense, grounded courage to meet your own distinct shape without turning it into a reason to hate yourself. It is looking at your own thick joints, your unpolished manners, or your hidden truths, and recognizing that your nature has done its best to sustain you, even when it was being squeezed into containers that were far too small. Compassion allows you to lay down the heavy, exhausting labor of performance, not because you have stopped caring about human connection, but because you realize that shaving down your own edges to fit a wall that doesn't understand your architecture will never give you a genuine home. You are revealing a different kind of strength, one that does not depend on compliance, Letting go in this high-altitude landscape of the spirit does not mean you abandon your loved ones or that you become indifferent to their presence. It means you release the extra struggle of demanding that they see your value before you allow yourself to exist. It means expanding your awareness so wide that their disapproval or their misunderstanding becomes just one feature of a vast, majestic mountain view. You are the entire terrace, not just the gap between the boulders. The granite can hold the uneven shale, the bitter frost, and the howling gale without losing its fundamental stability. By allowing your stone to settle into the crevice right now, you are pausing the war with your own reality, discovering a monumental self-belonging that survives precisely because it has stopped asking the valley for permission to remain solid. If it feels right, let your attention drift quietly away from the outer world, gathering around the heavy, unmoving reality of your physical frame, resting right here in the darkness. There is absolutely no need to adjust your posture, to correct the alignment of your spine, or to force your breath into an artificial rhythm. Perhaps you might simply notice how the cool evening air moves across your face, light and unconcerned, entering your lungs and leaving them entirely on its own. Even noticing this single, quiet expansion is enough to begin stepping down from the labor of control. Your body is already sustaining its vital rhythms. Without your deliberate management, you can safely resign from the position of supervisor and become the silent witness to this natural rising tide. With the next few exhalations, you might allow a deep wave of softening to settle through the base of your skull and down into your shoulder blades. Imagine your physical frame becoming completely wide and flat, like an ancient granite block settling deeper into the hillside turf under the weight of an autumn mist. If you notice a tightening in your chest or around your jaw where the social presentation always seems to lock first, there is no need to fight it or try to push it away. There is no requirement to perform, to speak, or to prove your charm in this dark room. You are fully permitted to let your muscles spread out against the solid support beneath you, becoming as heavy and unhurried as a permanent mountain ridge that has nowhere else it needs to travel tonight. As you drop deeper into this structural stillness, a sharp thought will almost certainly surface, attempting to pull you back into the old posture of tracking and adjusting your presentation for others. It might be an anxious question about how a colleague looked at you, a memory of a sentence you wish you could recall, or a bitter projection about an upcoming gathering where you feel you must wear the mask. When this happens, there is no need to punish yourself for overthinking. Instead of engaging with that mental friction, you might gently give this internal pattern a simple name, whispering it silently within your own awareness. You could say to yourself, polishing the stone, or perhaps tracing the calligraphy. By naming the pattern, you step off the path of the struggle. You are no longer the one trying to force yourself to blend in, but the one observing the wall from a safe distance on the high terrace. Now, if the image feels comfortable, visualize that specific social worry or that deep sense of personal mismatch as a heavy, unpolished piece of dark shale with a sharp, uneven wedge shape resting heavily in your open palm. Feel the cold, coarse texture of the mineral flaking against your skin, recognizing how much mental energy you have spent trying to grind this distinct fragment into a smooth, uniform brick that fits the valley's design. You do not have to force the stone to disappear or pretend it doesn't feel rough. Instead, picture yourself placing that dark wedge gently into the deep, irregular crevice between the massive granite boulders along the mountain pass. As you leave the stone there, let the image change in your mind's eye. Watch the mountain mist roll over the wall, bringing with it a vast, cold dampness that slowly glazes the structure in frost. Instead of seeing your mismatch as an error, watch it find its hidden fissure within the living bedrock of the peak. The wedge doesn't shift as the alpine wind intensifies. It doesn't strain to change its grain. The mountain gale blows straight across the terrace, leaving the structure entirely undisturbed because the mismatched piece is holding the boulders completely locked in place. The weight of your social future is no longer being supported by your frantic thoughts. It has been integrated into the massive, silent permanence of the mountain, which is fully capable of bearing the storm without ever losing its foundation. There is no need to force a sudden sense of perfect confidence or a dramatic emotional release right now. True transformation within the authentic self does not happen like a sudden flash of lightning. It is a slow, structural settling, like stone components becoming completely seasoned by the frost over many winters. Even if your heart still holds a remnant of its daily isolation, or if your mind remains somewhat active, you are still practicing the art of yielding. You can return to this grounding practice whenever you are ready, or you can simply let it dissolve into the background of your awareness. The mattress is holding your skeletal frame perfectly, requiring no effort from your throat or your identity, and for the next several hours, your absence from the circle is fully sanctioned. 2 seasons after his experience with the shale wedge, Ren found himself descending from the high terrace to a steep mountain pass, where a narrow draystone path hugged a sheer rock face. Although he had begun to find a sense of dignity in his distinct density, the deeper test of his transformation lay in encountering the very valley world he had fled, navigating its judgment without losing his grounding. Sister Rin had sent him down to assist an old mountain stonemason named Haku, who was reinforcing a collapsing ledge that supported the primary trade route between the isolated high hermitages and the sprawling towns of the lowlands. The sensory world of this pass was sharp, dangerous, and raw, dominated by the smell of bitter frost, crushed pine needles, and the cold slate-gray light of an approaching alpine storm. Master Haku was a man built like a gnarled mountain oak, his shoulders hunched from decades of lifting heavy boulders, and his breath smelling of wild ginger tea. He worked without mortar, balancing massive stones using only their natural weight and the unseen center of gravity hidden within their unworked cores. His primary tool was a thick, rough wooden leveling plumb line, weighted at the bottom with a piece of unworked river jade that swung silently above the abyss. Ren's role at the pass was to hold the heavy stone steady while Haku checked their alignment. Late one afternoon, a group of travelers from the capital came riding up the pass. Among them was an elder cousin from Ren's own lineage, a scholar whose robes were embroidered with silver thread and whose hands were perfectly soft from a lifetime of holding delicate calligraphy brushes. The travelers stopped to let their horses rest, and the cousin instantly recognized Ren, who was covered in gray stone dust, his fingers bleeding slightly from the sharp edges of the shale. The cousin laughed, a clear, ringing sound that echoed off the sheer rock face, carrying with it all the refined condescension of the lowlands. "Look at the great artist of our house," the cousin remarked to his companions, pointing a fan at Ren's dirt-stained tunic. "He could not master the brush, so he has chosen to become a common beast of burden, stacking rocks for old men in the mud. He has truly found his level." Ren felt a familiar, burning wave of humiliation hit his chest. The old, sharp script of his childhood instantly took over his mind, screaming that he was a failure, an outcast, who would always be an object of ridicule to those who spoke the language of elegance. His muscles tightened, his breath became shallow, and his first impulse was to drop the stone he was holding, hide his face in his hands, or shout a bitter defense to prove that he was not a fool. He was entirely trapped in the habit of treating the cousin's mockery as an absolute verdict on his worth. Master Haku did not intervene, nor did he offer a single word of rebuke to the travelers. He simply stood by the half-built wall, holding the wooden plumb line, watching the unworked river jade swing slowly back and forth in the cold wind. He looked at Ren, whose body was shaking with the effort of suppressing his rage and shame. Instead of speaking, Haku took the rough wooden plumb line and held it directly against the center of the large boulder Ren was struggling to keep steady. He tapped the jade weight, letting it drop close to the rock, then pointed to the vertical string. "Look at the line, Ren," Haku said softly, his voice low and scraping like a heavy stone sliding over gravel. "The travelers are looking at the surface of the wall, checking if the stones are clean, smooth, and painted to match the palaces of the capital. But the mountain does not care about the paint. The wall stands because each stone aligns its own center of gravity with the core of the earth. If a stone tries to lean toward the valley to please the onlookers, it will fall the moment the first frost hits the pass." Ren looked at the vertical string of the plumb line. The jade weight swung erratically for a moment as a gust of wind swept up the chasm. But as Ren watched, the string slowly settled, pointing straight down into the unmoving center of the mountain. Completely indifferent to the storm and the laughter of the travelers, a sudden, quiet realization occurred within Ren's chest. His transformation did not manifest as a magical wave of confidence, nor did it erase the painful memories of his youth. It showed itself in one small disciplined act. He took a single slow breath before reacting. He looked at his cousin's refined, mocking face, and then down at the unworked river jade. He realized that his cousin's opinion was just another passing gust of wind whistling through the peaks, an external pressure that had no power to uproot him unless he chose to lean into its momentum. Ren did not shout, he did not apologize, and he did not drop the stone. He simply exhaled, allowing the weight of his body to drop straight down into the soles of his feet, anchoring his stance into the solid ledge of the pass. He adjusted his grip on the rough boulder, aligning its heavy center exactly with the vertical path of the plumb line, and slid it firmly into the wall. The travelers eventually rode on, their voices fading into the cold fog of the upper slopes, leaving Ren standing in the quiet dusk. He had stopped the habit of treating their perspective as his truth, recognizing that his self-belonging was anchored in a density they could neither see nor measure. When we look into the deep mechanics of our own internal unrest, we see that the mind has spent a lifetime using the illusion of conformity as its primary shield against rejection. We construct an entire identity around being agreeable, smooth, and easily integrated into the social landscapes we inhabit, believing that our safety is entirely dependent on our ability to mirror the behavior of the crowd. When a sudden sense of mismatch or a hidden truth disrupts that alignment, our internal foundation begins to fracture. To escape this vulnerability, the ego initiates an exhausting pattern of self-policing, attempting to shame our unique attributes into a shape that our lineage will instantly validate. We replay old conversations late into the night, dissecting our micro-expressions under the cold lens of self-criticism, hoping that if we just monitor ourselves tightly enough, we can maintain our place in the circle. This persistent resistance to our own unconditioned nature is the exact process that converts a simple structural difference into a profound spiritual exile. Buddhist wisdom clarifies this struggle by distinguishing between the two distinct layers of distress we meet in our lives. The first pain is simply what the natural world delivers, the reality of our distinct grain, the unique temperament we were born with, the mismatched sensitivities that separate us from our families, or the fact that our authentic path does not run parallel to the traditions of our peers. This first pain is like the unworked river jade swinging in the mountain wind. It is heavy, raw, and a reflection of the natural variation that belongs to all living consciousness. We cannot always prevent these differences, as our spirits are part of a boundless, changing landscape, not predictable replicas designed to fit a standard mold. The second pain, however, is the intricate architecture of suffering that the mind manually constructs on top of that natural variation. It is the panic that labels our distinctiveness as a fatal flaw, the self-judgment that claims we must be broken because we cannot trace the elegant lines of the capital, and the constant rehearsal of future interactions where we imagine ourselves entirely exposed, humiliated, and cast out. This second pain is fueled by our desperate need for external approval, the fear of sitting with an uncertain social standing, and the habit of turning our feeling of mismatch into our entire identity. We stop viewing ourselves as a vast, spacious consciousness that happens to contain an uneven edge, and we begin viewing ourselves as a defective fragment that must constantly apologize for its presence. You do not have to spend your remaining energy feeding this second pain tonight. While you may not be able to change the perspectives of your peers, or erase the historical distance between yourself and your family, you can absolutely choose to withdraw your fuel from the war with your own reality. When you pause the internal battle, you are not engaging in a weak surrender or pretending that your social loneliness does not exist. Instead, you are establishing a completely different relationship with your difficulty. True peace is never found by demanding that your nature become an imitation of someone else's calligraphy. Peace is discovered when you realize that your awareness is wide enough to let the mismatch exist without letting it dominate the center of your heart. We often cling to our performance because we fear that if we drop the mask, we will be left standing alone in the frost without a roof. We treat our distinct density as a secret shame, throwing our thoughts against our own boundaries until our internal landscape is completely bruised. But look at what happened to the uneven shale wedge when it stopped trying to match the smooth face of the wall. It ceased to be a discarded fragment and became the very piece that kept the massive boulders from collapsing into the chasm. Its value did not vanish when it refused to be square. Its purpose simply shifted from decoration to structural stability. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal as you lie here in the quiet, allowing yourself to see that your mismatch is not an error, but an invitation to find your own center of gravity, aligned directly with the unmoving core of the mountain. This high alpine wisdom does not belong solely to solitary stone terraces or ancient mountain passes. It is meant to be lived tonight, right here on your mattress, and tomorrow, when you re-enter the frantic currents of your modern environment. We encounter our own deep slate-gray perimeters every single day in the small, contemporary frictions that cause our chests to lock and our minds to scan for danger. You practice this when you are lying awake at midnight, watching the silent screen of your phone, waiting for a text message that might validate your place in someone's life, or replaying a minor conversational mistake made hours ago as if it were a catastrophic fall. We buy a fragile peace by checking for reassurance over and over, trying to find an external anchor to steady the phantom currents of our deep inner restlessness. Think of how often you smile while feeling immensely heavy inside, presenting a smooth, agreeable surface to the world, because you believe your family, your partner, or your social circle cannot afford to see your true texture. We look at the curated trajectories of those around us on our feeds and instantly begin comparing our rhythm to their speed, feeling a cold, hollow ache that says we are falling behind in life, that we are running out of time, or that our natural capacity is simply not enough. We want nothing more than to drop the mask and rest, yet we feel a biting guilt for resting, as if our right to exist on this earth must be earned through continuous compliance and endless performance. In all these moments, we are acting exactly like the young apprentice on the bench, burning our own vital energy trying to force an unworked stone to behave like fluid ink. True peace is not a grand, flawless achievement that you reach after solving every relationship dynamic or straightening every crooked line in your history. It is a quality of awareness, practiced in the smallest, most ordinary pauses, a single, slow breath taken before answering a sharp question or reacting to an old feeling of exclusion is a profound form of spiritual wisdom. It is the exact moment you look at a frantic impulse and realize that not every anxious thought deserves your automatic obedience, and not every heavy feeling is a command to change your shape. You can care deeply about your people and your path, without gripping their approval so tightly that your own spirit begins to fracture. You can rest tonight without earning it first through total exhaustion, trusting that your unique density requires no external license to occupy its space. Tomorrow, when the old habit whispers that you must polish your edges or escape your own skin to be worthy of love, remember that you have the option to let the jade weight settle. When a wave of social panic arrives, or when you face the gray fog of an uncertain future, you can choose to sit quietly with that mismatch rather than trying to force an immediate imitation. You can allow your presence to become heavy, solid, and silent, letting the natural weight of your reality distribute itself across the deep mineral floor of your awareness. The world will manage its own expectations without your constant anxiety, and for the remainder of this night, the most compassionate action you can take is to leave the wall exactly as it stands, letting the vertical path of your own center hold you completely straight in the dark. The cadence of the mountain wind is slowing down now, drawing your awareness deeper into the quiet, dark stone that remains when all your performances have been laid down in the frost. Let your breath become completely soft, a faint and shallow vibration that requires no steering, no monitoring, and no structural correction. With every slow rise and fall of your chest, imagine your physical frame losing its sharp, anxious corners, absorbing the cold stillness of this room just as the unworked shale absorbs the damp mist of the high terrace. Your shoulders are sinking heavily into the mattress beneath you, letting go of their long routine of alertness, melting down into the unmoving foundation that has been waiting for you all along. The peak is entirely quiet out there in the fog, its massive ridges resting effortlessly beneath the winter sky, without needing you to trace a single line of calligraphy or stand watch at the pass. You can feel the deep, comforting weight of your limbs as they soften, becoming as dense, unhurried, and steady as that unworked river jade hanging silently against the granite face of the mountain. The storms of the world can continue to move above you, whistling and shifting through the dark chasm, but they cannot disturb the profound stillness that lives at the very bedrock of your being. The heavy dust of your old identity is washing away in the dark, leaving your heart clean, seasoned, and entirely at peace with the distinct grain of your existence. There is nothing left to fix before the sun rises, no path to repair, and no one to rescue from their own natural journey through the weather. The mind is no longer polishing the stone, it is simply letting the wedge rest in the crevice, allowing the massive permanence of the mountain to hold what you could never change through force of will. Your breath is growing quieter now, a faint murmur of wind through the branches of a solitary tree, regular, distant, and perfectly safe. You have returned to your own quiet source, a place where you are permitted to be completely empty of compliance, completely useless to the capital, and completely supported by the granite floor. Let the words dissolve into the cold air of the room, leaving behind only the deep, heavy sensation of a body that has finally chosen to settle into its own density. The fog is slow, the frost is heavy, and your eyes can close with an absolute certainty that the earth will hold its own boundaries while you disappear into the shadows of sleep. You are safe enough to stop existing as a performer for the remainder of this night, allowing your consciousness to sink softly through the slate-gray depths into the perfect immobility of the mountain ridge. And what if the home you have been searching for in the approval of others was actually the uncompromised density of the stone that has been holding you steady from the very beginning? The deep, unyielding stillness of the high peaks extends its presence far beneath the fleeting disturbances of the human valleys, guarding a quietude that has remained uncompromised through countless winters. In the dim silence of this room, your awareness is drifting into that exact same unmeasured depth, dropping beneath the shallow surface layers of social calculations, remembered criticisms, and the exhausting effort of maintaining a mask. Your physical body has become entirely heavy, sinking into the firm support of the mattress like a massive slab of granite that has found its permanent rightful shelf on the mountain terrace. The world below may continue its restless, competitive churning, but down here, at the core of your resting frame, there is only the vast, unchanging stability of an unconditioned heart that has finally stopped trying to blend with a foreign design. We spend so much of our vital energy running away from our own distinct texture, treating our natural mismatch as a catastrophic failure that must be corrected with greater self-policing and tighter emotional restraint. We live under the constant, punishing belief that if we allow our true, unpolished nature to be seen, the structural integrity of our entire world will collapse, leaving us stranded in absolute isolation. But the wisdom of the high terrace reminds us that your unique density is not an error in the stone. It is the very quality that gives you your indestructible permanence. Your fatigue tonight is a quiet, sacred invitation to stop pretending you are a fluid, agreeable stroke of ink designed to please the courts of the capital. It is the natural calling of the spirit to return to its raw mineral root, to lay its weight against the bedrock and trust that the mountain is fully capable of maintaining its balance without your constant performance. Let the breath grow even more faint now, a soft and delicate sigh that barely moves the cool air around your lips, perfectly synchronized with the immense frozen silence of the midnight hour. You do not need to guide the path of the inhalation or watch the rib cage to make sure it maintains its rhythm. You can let the breath go entirely, allowing it to become a natural, involuntary movement like the slow settling of frost over the high scree fields. There is absolutely no requirement for you to be interesting, acceptable, or smooth for anyone right now. You are no longer the scholar, the pleaser, or the quiet survivor trying to earn a place in the circle. You are simply a solid physical presence resting in the dark, completely unneeded by the valley, and completely at peace with your own distinct weight. The tools of your social survival have all slipped from your calloused fingers, drifting down into the deep chasm where they can no longer cause your heart to bleed. Think of how the high mountain pass looks when the twilight has fully faded, and the heavy alpine fog has completely blotted out the dividing lines between the cliffs, the paths, and the sky. In that vast monochromatic darkness, every stone loses its need to justify its placement, becoming part of one monumental, breathing whole. The uneven shale wedge does not struggle to look like the smooth boulders beside it. The river jade weight does not strain to change its raw, unworked composition. They all dissolve into the same silent landscape of the peaks, resting together in the shared, unconditional sanctuary of the night. You can allow the boundaries of your own mind to soften in this exact same way, letting the sharp definitions of your social anxieties, your history of exclusion, and your family's expectations fade into the dark corners of the room, until there is nothing left but the pure, spacious awareness of the mountain. The small, lingering echoes of the day's demands are growing more and more distant, like the sound of a traveler's horse trotting down a steep path, 3 ridges away through the heavy mist, faint, irrelevant, and completely incapable of reaching your resting place on the terrace. You do not need to lift your head to listen to the fading voices. You can let the sound drift past, growing smaller and smaller until it is completely swallowed by the immense cold silence of the upper wilderness. Your chest is completely wide and free, an open frame where the evening air can circulate without meeting a single knot of pride or anxiety, carrying away the last remaining scale of your daily labor. You have stayed strong for long enough, held the mask for long enough, and fought your own grain for long enough. The mountain has taken the burden from your hands, and it is holding your foundation perfectly along the deep bedrock. Sink further still into the warm, heavy mineral floor of your mattress, letting the last faint embers of your wakefulness dissolve into the eternal, steady murmur of the wind beneath the stars. There are no scripts to memorize before the dawn, no paths to secure, and no mismatched identities to repair within the theater of your thoughts. The stone is perfectly seasoned, the grain is steady, and the deep quiet has claimed every ounce of your ancient resistance, leaving behind only the pure, unhurried sensation of a heart that has finally returned to its own unconditioned home. Let yourself be carried down into the deepest, darkest pools of the mountain silence, where the air is still, the foundation is permanent, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to defend, and absolutely nothing left for you to solve. The great stone ridges of the peak remain entirely unmoved by the passage of the hours, holding their position in the dark with a calm that requires no external validation. In this deep, unhurried layer of the night, the mind can finally release its grip on the small fragments of social anxiety that kept it hovering at the surface for so long. The heavy, settled weight of your body is pulling you further down into a safe and grounded rest. You can feel the mattress receiving the absolute density of your posture, a weight that has completely stopped trying to reshape itself to fit the expectations of the valley below. The stone has accepted its placement completely now. The long, delicate strands of your nervous system, which spent the daylight hours vibrating under the tension of 100 imaginary filters, are beginning to cool, uncoiling into the quiet dark of this solitary room. Think of how the high-altitude forest behaves when the autumn wind drops and the thick frost begins its long, silent descent over the needles. The solitary pine does not rush to alter its branches to match the shapes of the valley trees. It simply yields to the chill, leaving its roots anchored exactly where the seed originally fell. The mountain earth is cool, firm, and perfectly passive, asking the tree no questions about its symmetry, its history, or the path it took to find this high ridge. In the same way, this dark room places no demands upon the quality of your presentation tonight. It does not ask if you have done enough to please the circle, nor does it measure whether you have earned the right to close your eyes. The air you are breathing enters your chest as a quiet gift and leaves as a slow release of your oldest defense. We spend so many years believing that our hypervigilance is a form of protection, a sacred pact we have made with our lineage to keep ourselves from being cast out. But when you look down through the clear, still space of your own awareness, you see that the mountain bedrock has been holding both you and the paths for thousands of winters before you ever learned to wear a mask. The earth does not need your conformity to stay solid beneath your feet. The people around you do not need the frantic, bleeding grip of your overthinking to find their own balance through the seasons. There is a deep, unheralded wisdom in allowing them their own relationship with your presence, letting go of the pride that says you alone must be the author of their approval. Let the breath become even more distant now, like the faint sound of wind moving through dry winter grass 3 ridges away. You can notice the tiny space at the very end of each exhalation, that microscopic pause where the old air has fully departed and the new air has not yet arrived. In that tiny clearing, there is no responsibility, no history, no name, and no obligation to conform. It is a completely empty room within the heart, a small temple carved out of the solid stone, where you are nothing but a witness to the silence. You do not have to fill that space with next week's interactions or yesterday's regrets. You can simply let it widen, allowing the sharp definitions of your personality to blur into the dark edges of the room. The uneven shale wedge that spent 50 winters in the high pass did not achieve its structural purpose by working or straining to become smooth like the boulders beside it. It achieved it by being completely exposed to the elements, by allowing itself to be driven deep into the crevice, until everything that was loose and unnecessary had been ground into dust. Your fatigue tonight is that very same dust, the rough bark of your old performance being worn away by the sheer depth of your living. You do not have to fight the wearing down. You can trust that what remains beneath the callouses is something incredibly solid, a resilient and seasoned presence that knows exactly how to stand when the morning demands it, and exactly how to sink when the night provides a sanctuary. Let your jaw soften even further, letting the weight of your skull sink an inch deeper into the fabric beneath you. The muscles in your chest are opening up like the high mountain pastures. After the travelers have gone home for the season, wide, quiet, and smelling of damp earth and late frost, there is no one left to answer to tonight, no messages to check, no expectations to manage, and no fortress to guard against the dark. The world is continuing its immense, slow turn without your assistance, and the people whose approval you chased all day are safe within the custody of their own shadows. You have fully withdrawn your hands from the oars, leaving the boat to drift into the tall reeds where the water is flat and perfectly still. The dark is not an emptiness you need to fear. It is a warm, thick blanket of mountain fog that has come to cover your fractures, keeping the cold wind from reaching the sensitive places in your spirit. Let the remaining thoughts float past like small pieces of loose shale, carried by the wind down the slope. Distant, irrelevant, and entirely out of reach. You do not need to follow them down into the valley. You can stay right here, resting on the steady floor of your own awareness, watching the surface light fade until there is nothing left but the slow, regular rise and fall of your physical form. The teaching has settled deep into the marrow of your bones now, no longer as a set of words to remember, but as a physical realization that you are allowed to break your alignment with the world's demands. You are returning home to the ancient stillness that existed before you ever learned how to be smooth, before you ever took up the burden of being the one who fits in. The darkness is full, safe, and perfectly receptive, waiting to swallow the last remnants of your vigilance. Let the mountain take the rest of your breath, letting the mind sink completely into the soft mud of the riverbed, where the water is deep, the tide is steady, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to solve. The immense, dark expanse of the mountain peaks opens up to receive your spirit, offering a silent, monumental container that has never asked for anything but your complete presence. In this vast and unconditional stillness, the exhausting mental habits of the daylight hours lose their velocity, dissolving one by one into the gray fog that blankets the scree fields. You can feel the mattress beneath you as an absolute, uncompromising mineral shelf, a foundation that doesn't shift, warp, or demand that you justify the space you occupy. The long, rigid pathways of your nervous system, which spent the day locked in a state of hyper-vigilant defense, are expanding now, softening into the deep, cooling dark of this sanctuary like seasoned iron resting after a long fire. Think of how the ancient bedrock of the pass absorbs the weight of the massive boulders that form the retaining wall. It does not strain to hold them up, nor does it complain about the irregular, sharp corners of the shale wedges driven into its fissures. It simply remains completely still, allowing the weight of the mountain to distribute itself naturally across its surface, fully integrated with the laws of gravity and earth. In this quiet hour, your physical frame is permitted to exist in that exact same unbothered state. You do not have to perform, you do not have to fix, and you do not have to trim away a single piece of your natural texture to deserve this rest. You are fully sanctioned to be as heavy, as separate, and as silent as the stone beneath the ridge. We carry such an immense, unnecessary burden when we treat our distinct sensitivities as a personal failure or a betrayal of our lineage. We burn our remaining life force replaying our social interactions, searching for the exact moment our presentation faltered, operating under the false assumption that if we just monitor ourselves tightly enough, we can maintain an artificial alignment with the crowd. But the old stonemason reminds us that the wall survives the winter frost precisely because it contains stones that refuse to be square. Your mismatch is not a deformity. It is the unique coordinate where your true center of gravity lives, aligned directly with the unmoving core of the earth, rather than the shifting opinions of the valley below. Let the breath become even smaller now, a tiny, almost imperceptible current of air that moves like the slowest mist through the dark canyons of the peak. There is no longer any need to manage the rise and fall of your chest or to watch the thoughts to make sure they are orderly. Everything is moving on its own natural rhythm, a quiet, involuntary pulse that links your physical form to the silent turning of the dark earth. You are no longer the messenger running down the mountain roads, nor are you the judge presiding over the utility of your own limbs. The tools have all been dropped, the plumb lines have been laid down on the shale, and the night is managing its own immense cycles without a single drop of sweat from your forehead. The small, lingering anxieties that still hover at the edge of your consciousness are nothing more than flakes of rust drifting away in the sea fog, losing their sharp edges and sinking one by one into the shadows of the mountain. You do not need to reach out your fingers to catch them or try to organize them before tomorrow. You can simply watch them pass through the open spaces of your awareness, growing smaller and more distant until they vanish entirely into the silver dark. Your chest is completely wide and unconfined, an empty frame where the cool evening air can pass without meeting a single knot of resistance, carrying away the last remaining scale of your daily labor. You have stayed strong for long enough, carried the mask for long enough, and fought your own grain for long enough. The earth has accepted your perimeter, and it is holding your foundation with an absolute, unconditional tenderness. Sink further still into the warm, heavy bedrock of your mattress, letting the last faint embers of your wakefulness dissolve into the eternal, steady murmur of the wind beneath the fog. There are no lists to complete before the dawn, no paths to repair, and no unchosen futures to navigate within the theater of your thoughts. The iron is perfectly seasoned, the granite is steady, and the deep quiet has claimed every ounce of your ancient resistance, leaving behind only the pure, unhurried sensation of a heart that has finally returned to its own unconditioned home. Let yourself be carried down into the deepest, darkest silence of the mountain floor, where the pressure is stable, the night is permanent, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to defend, and absolutely nothing left for you to solve.